Superstars of the sign-in. Not only are we going to start to build our Snacktacular restaurant review app, we are also going to perform a repeatable set of steps with reusable code that will work for any other app you'd like to create that offers sign-in using a Google account. Now, the animation at the left shows how the login will behave when we're done, and in this video we're going to configure a new app via the Firebase console, install the appropriate CocoaPods, set up a reusable UI, and use reusable code that can be leveraged exactly as is when starting other projects. Fix the greater than year-long errors that exist as of this recording in the Firebase Swift docs. And our code will let us easily customize the Firebase Pre-Built Authentication UI by adding a custom logo and changing the background color. Let's log in to Big Learning. So to get us started, I've created a folder with some assets that we'll use in the Snacktacular project. You can find that at bit.ly/prof-g-swift-files. That'll take you to a Google Drive. Once there, right-click on Snacktacular Files and select Download. Your browser will take a moment to zip up the folder. My browser must have a strange configuration setting because it's asking me if I want to leave. I'm going to click on Leave, but it's not really going to take me away. Instead, it'll give me a Save dialog. I'm going to save mine to the desktop, and I'm going to call this Snacktacular Files. If your browser doesn't ask you for a name, it's probably saved this in your Downloads folder, so you can look there. Then I'm going to minimize my browser, double-click on the zip file to expand it, and I don't need the zip file anymore, so I can throw that away. Now let's create our project, so we'll launch Xcode, click on Create a new Xcode project, Single View App, Next. I'm going to name this project Snacktacular. Make sure that you have this set as a storyboard project. This is not a Swift UI project. Click Next, click Create. And now let's grab some of those assets that we're going to use in this project. So I'm going to minimize Xcode. I'm going to open up my Snacktacular Files folder that we just unzipped. I'm going to command click on my app icon set folder that has my icons as well as the logo PNG. Then I'll return to my Xcode project, double click the title bar to expand the window to full screen, click on the assets catalog. The assets catalog should have one item in here, this app icon set here. You could just click that and press the delete key to get rid of this because we're about to replace it. Then return to the Finder, drag these two items over and let them go right inside of your assets catalog. And you can see that we've got this Snacktacular icon that shows up. Now let's quit Xcode and install the CocoaPods that we're going to need. So back in the Snacktacular Files folder that I downloaded from the Google Drive, I'm going to click and drag this pod file over into my Snacktacular project, just at the first level. If I go inside this folder, I can now see that I've got the pod file in here, right alongside my other Snacktacular folder and my Xcode proj. And I'm going to command space and type in terminal, press return to bring up the terminal. I'll type in cd space, don't press return yet though, cd is the command to change directory, but we need to put the directory in afterward. Then I'll head back to the Finder and I'll click on the Snacktacular folder right here in the title bar, drag it over into the terminal program, let go, and this little shortcut will write the exact path to be able to cd or change directory into the terminal, press return. If this worked properly, you should see the word Snacktacular just to the left of your %, and I'm going to type in pod space install and press return. Now there are a lot of CocoaPods in this file. This is going to take a while. Now while we're waiting for the install, I'll point out that you don't need all of these pods to install on every project. Now the project we're creating in this video series, Snacktacular, is going to be using Google Places autocomplete, so that's why we're installing Google Places. And even though we don't formally install Google Maps as part of the CocoaPod list that you see here, if you watch the output of the terminal after you typed in pod install, you'll probably see that Google Maps is being installed as well. Now, if you're not using Google Places autocomplete, you can remove this. Firebase Core gives us the basics for the Firebase Cloud service. Now we're going to be using Firebase Storage, which we will use when we store images. So include this if you're ever going to use that service to store large files like images, sound, or video. Firebase Firestore is the database we're using. The first database product was called just simply Firebase. This is the next generation product. It's more robust. This is definitely the one you want to use. Now Firebase UI/auth will allow us to take advantage of a pre-built authentication user interface that asks for your user ID and password, and we'll show how you can further customize this UI, adding a logo and changing the background color. And we're going to be adding Firebase UI/Google so that we can allow sign-in using a Google account, and that includes use of any Gmail account. There are other sign-in mechanisms, but to do things quickly, we're just going to focus on Google. It's fast to implement, Google accounts are widely used. If you want, you can explore to add other login methods on your own. Firebase supports a ton of other methods: Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, Apple Sign-In, a generic email and password that you can collect from the user, although each of these requires some additional code. Again, if you want to do this, just check the online authentication documentation from the Google Firebase team. And this additional CocoaPod down here, SD Web Image, this is a service where we'll use some of their libraries to show the profile picture that we'll add toward the end of this project. Also, you're welcome to visit the online documentation for each of these CocoaPod providers to see if there are any updates, but at the time the video was recorded, the configuration you're looking at here was the best one for us to use for installation. The installation will chug along. If you see any warning messages in amber or in red, make sure that you read those and respond to them accordingly. Otherwise, when you're done, you're back at the %sign prompt, you can just quit terminal. Now remember, to launch your project, you always want to click on the XC workspace, so I'm going to right click on this and just set the tag to green to remind me, hey, this is the guy to click on. You see the little green circle to the right of this. Perhaps you don't need that kind of reminder, but I'm old. I need all the help I can get. So now go ahead and double click on that icon, launch your Xcode project, double click on the title bar to expand to full screen, and click on the blue Snacktacular project icon in the top of the upper left-hand corner of your project navigator. Now we need to head over to the web, because whenever we create a new Firebase project, we've got to create a new Firebase project using the Firebase console. Now our first step is to visit the URL firebase.google.com. So if you're not already signed up with a Google account and logged into Firebase, there's probably a message in the upper right-hand corner or someplace on the screen that says sign in, as you see here. Web pages are always being updated. There's a good chance it's been updated since I recorded this video, but use your best judgment to do what you need to do in order to be able to sign in and start to work with Firebase. So if you've never used this before, click on this to go ahead and sign in. You can use your Gmail account, which I recommend, to sign up, but once you've signed up properly, you should see in the upper right-hand corner something that says Go to Console. Once you're signed up, click on Go to Console. I've already got a bunch of existing projects. You probably don't have any here, but just click on the Add Project plus sign. Then give your project a project name. I'm going to call mine Snacktacular, and I'm going to click the Continue button. You'll get a message about using Google Analytics. This is a nice way to be able to monitor the usage of your app, but you can go ahead and deselect Enable Analytics for this project. Otherwise, you'll probably have to go through a bunch of additional steps that'll slow you down to add analytics. You can always add analytics later on. I've already got an analytics account set up for my website, so I'll leave it checked, then click on Continue. If you didn't click to install analytics, you're not going to see this screen. I've clicked on analytics, so I'm just going to click on my website. That's what my Google Analytics account is attached to. Then click Create Project. You'll see this little whirly circular animation, and your project is created. So in addition to your Xcode project, you now have a project in the cloud. Click Continue. And your Snacktacular project should launch by default. If not, just click on the square. And we want to build an iOS app, so on the Get Started screen, once you click on the iOS circle. Now, once again, one of the awesome things about using Firebase is that not only can you use these back-end services with your iOS app, but you could also use them with Android, on the web. This thing on the right is Unity, a platform favored by video game developers. So about Firebase, developers would say the back-end is cross-platform and supports multiple different types of clients. So now we're at our Add Firebase to your iOS app page. This first thing is asking us for an iOS bundle ID. Let's head back to Xcode. And with your project icon selected, that's the blue one at the top of the project navigator. If you're inside of your targets for your app and you're clicked on General, you should see Bundle Identifier. Why don't you highlight what's inside of that text box, copy everything with a Command-C, back to the web, and paste it in as your bundle ID. You can put in an optional app nickname. Snacktacular is probably a good name for you. I'm going to put Snacktacular-V4 since this is the first version I've created. Then click on Register App. The button swirls. On the next screen, you see this button that says Download Google Service-info.plist. Click that guy. Next, there's a good chance the website is going to ask you where you want to save this file. Very important. If you've done this a few times, there is a chance, especially if you're saving to your downloads folder, the name of the file that's being saved might have a number inside of parentheses at the end of the file name. If you see parentheses and a number at the end of the file name, or if your browser has by default saved this file to your downloads folder, but that file name has parentheses and a number, delete the parenthesis and the number and keep the rest of the file name as you see it here. By the way, each new Firebase project that you create via the browser will have its own Google Service-info.plist. So even though the files have the same name, the file for each project is different. So when you create your next Firebase project, make sure that you don't reuse this file. And by the way, if you ever need to download a copy of this file again, each project has a little gear icon in the upper left-hand corner next to Project Overview. If you click that, select Project Settings, and then scroll down, you'll see a link to download this project's version of this file. Now, I'm not going to save mine into the desktop. I'm actually going to save it inside of my very first Snacktacular folder. Then I'll click Save. If your browser automatically saves it to the Downloads folder, no biggie. You can just drag it from that folder into your project the way we're going to show right now. So find that file where you saved it. I'm going to click it. I'm going to drag it into my Xcode project, and I'm going to let it go just underneath info.plist. The exact placement isn't important, just as long as you've dragged it into the right project. The option should show up here right after you release the mouse button. Make sure they're clicked and configured as you see here and click on Finish. Then you can return to the browser. We've already downloaded Google Service-info plist, so you can click on Next. The next page talks about installing the CocoaPods, but we've already done that. Then return to your project. If you haven't already clicked on your Google Services-info plist, click on that file now. You got a bunch of different rows, but you want to find this one. It's probably your second row. It's called reversed_client_ID. Then click on the rightmost cell in that row. It should be the cell in the column named Value. Make sure that you can highlight and do highlight all the text that's inside of that and copy it with a Command-C. Then click on your Snacktacular project icon. That's the icon on the top of your project navigator. And with target selected as it is here, you want to click on Info. Then down here, you'll see a little expansion triangle that says URL types. It will probably say parentheses 0 parentheses. Click to expand the expansion triangle. Nothing's inside. But click on this little plus icon. That'll give you a few very cryptic data entry fields, and the only one we want to pay attention to is this one here on the right that says URL schemes. Click inside of that text field and then Command-V to paste everything you just copied from the value field in reversed client ID in the Google Service Info plist. Then back to the web, click Next, and this next screen points out how we need to configure our appdelegate.swift file. You'll see this line that says Import Firebase. Click on the icon to the right of this that's supposed to represent copy. This statement is now copied to the clipboard. Head back to the project. Make sure that you've clicked on appdelegate.swift. Then in the line just below Import UI Kit, you can Command-V to paste and import Firebase. Then head back to the browser. We got one more line. Click on the copy icon to the right of Firebase app.config. Head back to your project, and in this very first function here, the one that says did finish launching with options, we don't need this green comment line in here, but we can backspace to delete that, and in its space we can paste over what we just copied, which is Firebase app.configure. Then click on Next, and this next step never seems to work properly. Every time I've used this, I see this swirling circle next to checking if the app has communicated with our servers. You can just click on this underlined link that says skip this step and everything will be fine. So now we've created an app, we've installed all of the libraries that we need, and we've configured our appdelegate.swift file. Now we need to set up the sign-in methods that we're going to support, and we do that by clicking on Authentication over here on the left. And again, you'll have to do this for each Firebase project that you set up. On the authentication screen, click on this button that says Set Up Sign-In Method. This next screen should have the Sign In Method tab selected. Move your cursor into the row that says Google, and on the right-hand side you should see a pencil that shows up. Click that so that we can edit Google. Click on this toggle switch to enable it. Then scroll further down the page. You want to put in a project support email address. By the way, I use my Gmail account only for projects, so this is definitely not one to contact me on. Then you can scroll down and click on the Save button, and you should see that the sign-in provider Google is enabled. Now, if you click on the Users tab inside of Authentication, we see that no users have logged into your app. That's not surprising, but we'll change that in just a bit. Now, all these steps can be used the exact same way anytime you want to create a Google sign-in capability like the one we'll demonstrate. If you name things consistently like we're showing here, then you won't even need to change any line of code that we'll write. For now, let's click on viewcontroller.swift. We're going to change the name of this file and its associated view controller. So right-click on where you see view controller, refactor, rename, and since this is going to be our login view controller, why don't we call this upper camel case login view controller, press return. Refactor rename changes everything except for the comment. I'm just going to copy login view controller and paste it over the comment name up top just to be consistent. You don't need to do that. Now let's head to the main storyboard. We see on the left that this is now called the login view controller, which is great. With that view controller selected, go up under the editor menu, select embed in and navigation controller. We see the navigation controller off to the left. And now we're going to add another view controller. This next one will be the first real view controller in your app, the one where you go to after logging in. Now eventually you'll customize this with some app-specific logic and an app-specific user interface, but to get login working, we don't even need to add a Swift file for this new view controller. So again, everything that you'll see in this video will be repeatable anytime you want to set up a project with Google Sign-In that starts off like the one we're about to show. So click the library button, search for a view controller, and drag it onto the interface builder canvas just to the right of the login view controller. Now we're going to create a segue. This isn't going to be a segue that's associated with a button or clicking on a table view cell. It's going to be a segue that we call manually in our code. And the way that we do that is we go up to the dock in Login View Controller and we control drag from the little yellow ball into our new view controller. And for segue type, select Show. Now let's give this segue an identifier name. So I'm going to click on the circle in the arrow for the segue that we just drew. Then I'm going to click on the Attributes Inspector. The Attributes Inspector should say Storyboard Segue. And under identifier, I'm going to enter first show segue, one word, upper camel case. Then I'm going to replace this back button with a button that says sign out. So I'll click on library, search for a bar button item, drag it over, drop it right on top of the back button, and I'll change the bar button item's title to read sign out. Now I am going to pull up Google's Firebase documentation. I'm going to keep my Firebase console open in one tab. I'll open up a new tab and I'll search for the keywords Firebase Authentication Swift. Hopefully your first link is this one that says Get Started with Firebase Authentication on iOS. If so, click that. If not, find that link and click it. Over here on the left-hand side under iOS, why don't we start by clicking on Sign In with Pre-Built UI. That means Google's going to give us a generic login screen that they're going to build for us if we put in the right code. You see an example of what we can get over here on the right. This one not only supports sign in with Google, but also Facebook, Twitter. You can use your phone, you can use your email. You see buttons for each of these. Configuring and coding these up would take a lot more time though, so we're just going to stick with sign in with Google. Now, we usually strongly suggest that students type in their code and never just copy and paste code without understanding it. I'm going to modify that statement just a bit, and the reason for that is the Google sign-in code that we're about to use, much of it was written by Google, although I've changed it to make it work well and to work for reuse. But for rapidly prototyping apps, you might never touch this code, although you might decide to at some point if you want to replace the custom login interface with your own work. We're less interested in this tutorial, though, because we just want to get to the real social stuff of creating and sharing data in the cloud. So that's why we're using the Google pre-built user interface. Also, and unfortunately at the time of this recording, the Google documentation for Cloud Firestore's authentication has been out of date for over a year. And while the documentation we used for Google Place autocomplete was really excellent, the Firebase documentation for over a year now is not only confusing, but it generates errors with the latest versions of Apple's Swift update for iOS, as well as updates Google themselves have made with their own Firebase Authentication SDK. By the way, Firebase team, if you're watching this, you are goddesses and gods. Your work is truly empowering and fantastic, but you need to update your documentation, and if you need an intern, I can set you up. So the code I've written will allow you to sign in with Google, get that working really quickly. I'll show you the last few configuration steps that we'll still need to do in our app. We'll comment out one function, then we'll build and run. I'll describe what's happening here so that you can go back and really figure out what's going on step by step. Then we'll uncomment the function that we comment out, and I'll show you how you can add a custom logo and change the background color of the Google pre-built UI. So to get the code that we're going to be using, it's all going to go into our login viewcontroller.swift file. Go to the browser, open up a new tab, and you'll be able to find this at a GitHub gist at bit.ly and then login view controller. The L, the V, and the C are all capitalized. When you press enter, you'll see this site right here. Then just highlight the code, get everything from your last curly through the import statement, copy it with a Command C, then return to loginviewcontroller.swift in your project, highlight everything from the import statement to the last curly here, and then just Command V to paste your copied code over this code. Now the first thing I'm going to do is scroll all the way to the bottom and highlight our very last function here. So not the last curly, but the second to last curly through this func auth picker view controller. With that highlight, just Command /, that'll be commented out. This code will allow us to use our custom logo and also turn the background color to white, but I want to show you how things work without this first. Now, if you scroll up just above the extension, you'll see that there's an IB action here that's an unwind function. Now, the way that we're going to unwind here is by pressing on the sign out button. So this function here is going to go ahead and execute whenever sign out is pressed as part of the unwind. We need to make sure we've set that segue's identifier to sign out unwind and that this segue will execute this IB action. So click on main storyboard. Then in our unnamed view controller that we'll eventually customize in a future video, for now just control drag from the sign out button to the rightmost icon in the dock. That's the orange exit icon. When you let go, you'll see a list of any IB actions that could be attached to this segue. We want to attach it to the only one that's available. It's this one here that's named Unwind Sign Out Pressed with Segue. Make sure you click and select that, and we should see it show up in the document outline on the left. Now we need to give this segue an identifier, and it should be the same one that we have in our code. So let's click back on loginviewcontroller.swift. The identifier is right here between double quotes, sign out unwind. So highlight this, copy it, return to main storyboard, make sure that you've clicked on your unwind segue, go up to the attributes inspector, and paste in the identifier. Now another thing that we need to do in order to get the interface to behave nicely, Login View Controller is sitting in behind the scenes. It's the first view controller that our app will present, but it's only there to be able to recognize when we need to show the Google pre-built login user interface. So in order to not draw too much attention to this view controller, which is just resting in the back and doesn't have any interface elements on it, we're going to make sure that there's no animation that shows up when we segue back to the Login View Controller. Now the way that we do that is we make sure that we've clicked on the unwind segue here in the document outline. Then up in the attributes inspector, there's this little checkbox that says animates. Make sure that's clicked off. It should not be selected. Then we're going to do the same for the view controller that goes from the login view controller to this nameless view controller that's got the sign out button. So click on that segue, the little ball in the middle of this line, to expose its attributes in the attributes inspector, and just make sure that animates is not clicked. Yours probably is clicked, so unclick it if it is. Most of the time you do want animates to remain selected. We want to make sure that it's clicked off just in this situation when we're dealing with the Firebase pre-built login. Now I'm going to head over to loginviewcontroller.swift, and you know what? We can go ahead and build and run. Now while we're waiting to build and run, let me just show you what this code does. So again, we've imported Firebase UI. That's the library we're using. We set up an object called an FUI auth object. That includes all of Google's behind the scenes data structures that handle authentication. Now we declare it up top, but we can't initialize it until inside of view.did.load. That's also where we set up our AuthUI delegate, so that this code that's inside of this library can send messages to our code in this view controller, which is self, the delegate. Then in view did appear, so whenever this view controller appears, whether it's the first time the app runs, or if we're returning here from a segue, or if we've just got rid of the pre-built UI that's placed on top of it, we will call sign-in. Now the sign-in function that we see down here first gets a list of providers before it presents the view controller. Each of those providers will show up in a button on the bottom of the screen. It is possible to add more buttons, but you'll have to put in a lot more code and do some other configuration too, so we're sticking with Google. Then down here what we're doing is we're checking to see if a current user is logged in. If not, then the current user that we checked on this AuthUI object is going to be nil. Nobody is logged in. So then what do? Okay, we're getting ready to show the pre-built user interface. So we take a look at the providers. We set up a login view controller, which is a special type. This is the actual pre-built UI view controller that Google provides us. We're calling ours login view controller, not to be confused with the name of the class. This is something different. Then we need to set the modal presentation style to be full screen. We need to do that in order to make sure that view did appear will execute every time the login screen goes away. So this is important. It's a topic that we had learned about when we were working with both the weather gift app and the to-do list app. It's in here. You don't need to make the change. Then we present the login view controller the same way we presented any other view controller or alerts. We pass in its name. Animated is true. No completion handler is needed here. Now what happens if we are signed in? If we take a look up here and we see that the current user is not nil, but somebody's signed in, well then what we do is we just perform the segue and we head to our new view controller that's going to start the app. Now down here you see that there's an extension, and this is just code that Google needs in order to be able to run its pre-built user interface. Now we did put some additional code in here and did sign in with user. One of the things that we do is we make sure that there's no error here. If there is, we print out an error message in the description. But if we have logged in successfully, we print out the email address for the user. Now user is an object that's attached to all of this cool stuff we get with Google's login authentication. So one of the properties is .email. There should be an email associated with this, but if there's not, it'll just print out unknown email. Now, Google will actually handle dismissing the view controller that allows the user to log in, but then when that view controller dismisses, because we've got a full screen modal presentation, that will trigger when that screen goes away. The view did appear on this view controller, which calls sign in again, which takes a look and says, hey, is a current user logged in? If the view controller just dismissed after a successful login, then the segue happens. If the view controller dismissed because the user clicked the cancel button, or because the user just signed out, then the login view controller is presented again because the current user is nil. And here we go. We can see that the Google pre-built sign-in code pops up. We only see one service in here, sign in with Google. If we wanted to add the other services, we'd have to put more code in. Let's click sign in with Google and see what it does. Google's code takes over. We see a message, Snacktacular wants to use google.com to sign in. Click continue. Enter a Gmail account in here, then click next. I happen to be using two-step verification, so I've got to open up my phone. This is a feature attached to my Google account. If you don't have it and you want to enable it in your Google account, Google it. You'll find some instructions. Because I'm using two-step verification, I've got to open up the Google app on my phone. This is an example of the alert that pops up. Inside the Google app, this is what I'm prompted with. I'm going to click on yes. I've paused the video here, but the verification is instant. I didn't have to do anything with my app. The message is automatically sent from my phone, which is another device, to this simulator. I'm in. Again, that's a super nice bit of security that you get with your app, and you didn't have to do anything to code it. So here I am at the view controller that will eventually start my app. I've got my sign out button up here. If I click on that, I've signed out. I've segued back to that first view controller, the login view controller. My app checks to see if I'm logged in. It sees that I'm not, so it shows the pre-built sign-in UI. Now that I've logged out as John.Gallagher, I'm going to log in as a new user. But before I do that, let's head over to our console. Now we can actually see the users that have logged in on our Firebase console. So if we head back over to the web, we make sure that we're in the authentication section and we're looking at the users tab. I'm going to click this circular arrow in the upper right-hand corner here that refreshes the screen, and hey! My app knows john.gallagher@gmail.com logged in. They know when the account was first created, the last time the user signed in. This long user UID is a good way to identify unique users. So if you ever want to track inside of your database which users posted which information, it's more reliable than, for example, email address. If you move your cursor to the right side of each account row, you'll also see 3 vertical dots. These allow you to control that particular user account, so you could reset their password, disable their account, or delete their account entirely. So no, our app is truly multi-user. You could give this app to multiple people and see them all log in simultaneously. Let's see what happens when a new user account is created. So I'm going to log in this time as prof.gallagher@gmail.com. Again, I never check this email, so don't send me email on that address. Now that I'm logged in, return to the authentication console, click on the refresh arrow, and hey, Prof Gallagher shows up as well, and he's got a unique user UID too. This is working great. If you sign out, we segue back to the previous view controller. View did load executes. We check to see if there is a user. There's no user, so we show the login view controller. You click on cancel. No user is logged in, so we continue to show the sign-in screen. I probably should have done a better job wording the error message that you're seeing down here in the console. The reason those are displaying is there's not really an error in the code, it's just identifying that a user hasn't logged in, so it's once again presenting the login view controller. That happens whenever you click on cancel. And so now if we take a look at this pre-built user interface for signing in that Google gives us, it's nice, but we've got a gray background, we don't have a logo. Let me show you how you could change the background color and add your own logo. Now you've already got the code to do this, but we just commented it out. So let's head back to our login viewcontroller.swift, and let's head down to that function that you commented out. It's the last function that's inside of our extension. Highlight the whole function, then Command/ to uncomment it. Now the Firebase folks had some sample code online to customize the view controller, but then they changed their code last year, and that code broke, and it would no longer allow the user to change colors in the way that was demonstrated. So I've written this one for you, just to point out a few things that you've got in here. This will show any logo that's named logo, lowercase logo, that's inside of your assets catalog, inside of an image view that's located just above where the buttons are presented at the bottom of this view controller. This margin insets that you see up here is how much should we indent the margin on all 4 sides of the image view. And where you see down here where it says set background color to white, you can just change that UI color white to any color you want. Now there's one thing that I don't really like about the code that I've written here. I've sort of hard-coded 2 views based on arrays of subviews. And you see that just below where I set the color, I've actually written code that can go through and find these subviews. It's a little bit more complicated to discuss, so I'd rather just give you this code that is a modification of what Google originally posted online. If it turns out that Google makes another change, I'll be sure to update this code, and I'll post a link to any update below this video. Now we already have a logo in here. It's the Snacktacular hamburger logo. If you click on the assets catalog, and if you're vegan, you can imagine it's an impossible burger. If you decided you wanted to use this exact same code but a different logo, just make sure that it's named logo or change the name of the file in your code. Let's build and run and see how this looks. Nice! There's our logo, we can cancel, the screen goes away, but view did load will check to see if there's a valid user. There's no logged in user, so it shows the screen again. Notice that originally the view controller's background was gray, now it's white. You can go ahead and log in as you normally would. Everything works fine. Now what happens if we switch the logo? Well, here, just for demonstration purposes, is another logo that I've added. So the original one is now called Logo 2. Logo is a hackathon logo. So just to show you how things look when we build and run. And ooh, that looks lovely! If you had more login buttons because you had written the code to support more ways to log in, this button area at the bottom of the view controller would get taller and the logo would get smaller. But this is looking good. I hope you see this as a reusable chunk of code. Feel free to come back to this video every time you need to create a new Firebase project and you want to use Google Login. You're now writing apps that support multiple users, Swifter. Let's kick it up in the next video. Feel good about those skills and keep at it.